and he's helping people to learn how to do that in a practical way.
But
We can change what we eat.
But Steve, is that enough? Let's say we all did that.
Yeah.
Is that still enough?
It's difficult to say at this stage. I mean, the point is we have to do that, I would say, and there is an increasing global acceptance that we have to do that. We have no choice, and people might not want to do it, but fine. There is only one way that we will go if we don't. We will be forced to change. Climate change, nature. If we get out of a system of dynamic stability, which is one way of thinking about what sustainability is. It's a form of dynamic stability that allows a system to continue in its current form in a stable state whilst there's constant change and movement in that system. If you move over a threshold point, then that moves into a state of dynamic instability, and when that's connected to a whole range of systems, that means that pulls strings in all those other systems, and they all move into states of dynamic instability. So if we did those things intelligently and with wisdom, yes, they would probably be enough. We can transform the way we grow food, we can transform the way we generate energy, we can transform the way we build houses, we can transform the way we meet our physical needs. There is no lack of technology. It's not a technological issue, it's a human issue. It's our resistance to change that is the fundamental issue.
But let me play devil's advocate a little bit here, because this is something that interests me a lot personally. Okay, in the West, in theory, we can do that because we do have the resources still to do that, and we have the information and the expertise and technology and everything. But in a lot of underdeveloped countries, they're very poor, and understandably, they say, well, you in the West have so much, we have practically nothing, we want more, we want a car, we want a fridge, we want central heating when it gets cold. What do we say to them?
Well, that's a very obviously extremely important issue. Part of the reason that they want those things is because they're being sold those things. The global economic system has shifted countries' capacity to meet their own needs, to have self-reliance in food, to growing cash crops. People need to have choice. What we should really do is disengage them from our system, which every Western developed nation, it sells an image that's great and attractive, but you go, whether it's to the States or Britain or Germany or Japan, those large cities have a huge amount of poverty and suffering around them. I remember a talk given by a Buddhist monk who'd come over, I think, from Tibet, who said when he came over, and the suffering obviously being a key Buddhist theme, he was absolutely dumbfounded when he arrived, and he said there is so much more suffering in the West than there is in his home country, because we have tremendous levels of mental and psychological suffering, and we are constantly hammered with all these desires and these things that are supposed to give us happiness that don't, and marriage breakdowns, people unhappy with their work. How many of your viewers who are probably relatively aware and conscious, we would expect, how many of them are living in situations where there's unhappiness and suffering? Probably a reasonable proportion, whether it's health or relationships or work. So it's a bit, to me, to answer those questions, we have to talk about how we meet our needs and what really are our needs. Yes, there's ways in which developing and less developed nations can very easily be helped to meet their needs much more effectively than they are able to do at the moment. But that's not by following what the West gives them at the moment.
So I know you yourself live in a community which,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's completely sustainable, but it's working towards that.
Yeah.
How do you live practically different to everybody else or most other people in the UK?
I mean, it's really about having closer relationships with our neighbours, where we share a greater level of responsibility and therefore self-determination about what goes on in our immediate living environment. So, the community has 29 homes, about 70 members. We have, as well as the homes, we have a wood chip biomass heating system.
So what does that mean, biomass heating?
That means we get wood chip as a waste product from a local estate that produces timber for fencing and so on and so forth. And that's burnt to produce heat for space heating and hot water. So it's a very low carbon heating system, and we want to look at electrical energy. We have done a certain amount looking at the potential for ecological water and waste and sewage waste treatment. We have a small community supported agriculture project on our land, which means people are engaged in looking at what is grown, and we pay a certain amount of money in advance for our food, £200 a year, and twice a week for a lot of the year we're able to go and collect fantastically good vegetables. From
it's like an investment then, isn't it?
But really what the community is about is the way we make decisions about the issues like the hard landscapes, the paths and so on, the soft landscape. It's a leasehold system, so we have an annual service charge and so on and so forth. But a big part of the ethos was about looking at living in a different way, and its roots are in the world of Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy and Waldorf education. So there's a kindergarten, there's a sculpture studio, a pottery, and a project for people with learning difficulties. So it's about recognising there's different ways to educate that are about the whole person rather than passing exams.
So the kids that grow up in that community, they're going to have this bigger picture we were talking about earlier.
They are in so much richer environment than I grew up in. Growing up in a typical middle class, and being quite fortunate, but typical middle class comprehensive education. But the sociability of the children growing up where I live is so much higher, and their experience of different ways of living. I wouldn't suggest for a moment it's a radically different way of living. I've lived in more radical ways of living on a tent in a tent, army surplus tent on a Spanish hillside for 5 years, off grid, off mains, water and sewage, very close to nature. And where I live now is much more mainstream, but it is different than the way most people live, and it's mainly because we're more engaged in taking responsibility for how we manage our lives and the immediate environment we live in.
Do you primarily earn your money outside this community?
Yes, I work as a sustainability consultant, and I've worked in that field since '93. So quite a long time, and what I've seen is that there are plenty of solutions out there, but again and again what the blockages are: people's fear, people's wish to sit with the status quo, political systems which are very inappropriate for understanding complex issues, because the influences on decision making are not geared to making wise decisions. We don't have a political system that brings us good government. That's not the fundamental objective.